Hi, Howard. Welcome to Drag and Drop.
Hi, Feroz. It's great to be here. Thank you for the opportunity.
Pleasure to have you. Thank you for agreeing to speak with me. I've seen a few things you've been involved with, and I thought it'd be great to add to the conversation. So happy to have you here. For those who may not know about you, it'd be good to start with a bit of a background and introduction to yourself.
Sure. So, my name is Howard Miller, and I'm the Chief Information Officer at the UCLA Anderson School of Management. Today is actually my 7-year anniversary with
Wow,
UCLA. So, big day for
congratulations.
me today. And then prior to that, within the higher ed space, I spent almost another 7 years at Columbia Business School in New York in a similar role, which was acting CIO and CISO when I left Columbia. So, I've spent the better part of the last 14 years in higher ed.
Wow. Yeah, spending so much time in higher ed, I'm interested to know what makes, IT transformation in the higher ed space fundamentally different from the private sector.
Ooh, that's a good question. And, it's funny when I look back at my time at Columbia, and this was the mid 2010s, we were starting to do a lot of things that were cloud based that
Mm.
at the time we didn't call cloud based. And
Yeah.
so, I think business school specifically allows you the opportunity to sort of mirror your customer base, right? Because the students you're serving are coming through to be entrepreneurs and to be future leaders. We teach them about innovation, we teach them about strategy and entrepreneurship and leadership. And again, I found that in both of the last two places I've been, that as an IT professional, we get to mirror that culture maybe a lot more than our counterparts do at the center of the university. So, I tell another story. My first Zoom contract was in the single thousands of dollars. And when we bought Zoom,
Wow.
and this was 2013 or 2014, the premises the premise was we had an audio conferencing system that was
Mm.
costing us $2,000 a month. And we're like, no, this is too expensive. We need another solution. We came to Zoom. Well, and we didn't even realize at the time that Zoom was offering the video when we
Yeah.
first saw it. And then we saw the video, and then right away we rolled it out. And then people like, oh, how can I get this? Right. And this was
Yeah.
again 2013, 2014. So when I look back at those days, I give us a lot of props for
Mm.
actually being out in front of, again, cloud, and doing things that were innovative, and we're retiring legacy systems. A lot of the same story that I know
Mm.
we'll get into today,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
I just
Yeah.
think I've been fortunate that where I've landed has given me that unique opportunity to
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
innovative and to push a
Yeah.
narrative forward on
Yeah.
transformation.
Definitely. And yeah, we're gonna talk about low code and you're using the OutSystems platform as well. But before adopting and kind of getting into that side of low code, what was your biggest pain points that you were facing? Was it budget pressure, legacy systems, speed, or something else?
There's a ton of pressure in higher ed. Look, I mean, at the very forefront, one of the first lessons I learned in higher education is really that every penny matters, right?
Hmm.
And you talked about that transition from the corporate sector into
Yeah.
more of a higher ed space, and right, so your budget matters, what you spend on matters. I look at some of my peers on campus, and I'm a lot more fortunate than some of them, just in
Uh,
terms of the places where I have to spend. So you have to be fiscally responsible and fiscally prudent. I walked into a shop at UCLA that admittedly confused me a little bit. I wasn't quite sure what I was left or why it was put that way,
uh,
not because anything had done anything wrong. It was just sort of, it looked like it could use a refresh. It looked like it was ripe for transformation. It looked like whatever hand my predecessors had been dealt were ones that were really focused on things that were just meant to be operational, right? So the narrative was, okay, operational is fine. I prefer not to be an operational CIO. So what
uh,
problems can I actually go try to solve that would do a couple of things, right? One is obviously first and foremost maintain the operation, because that's still job one, and organizationally I report through
yeah.
a chief operations officer. But where can we be innovative? Where can we bring in new technology? Not because we just want to bring in new technology, but also because from an employee retention perspective, giving them new things to work on, I think is one way, because higher ed can't compensate maybe the same way that the private sector can.
Uh-huh.
So how can I keep people interested and engaged? And then, as we've talked about, there are things that we've just done forever because we've just done them forever. And I'm a bit of a challenge that narrative to say, is there any way that we could do that differently? Is there a more modern approach? Is there a better approach? Is there potentially a less costly approach? And we'll get into this as well, but it's been my
Uh-huh.
narrative around OutSystems in general is
Uh-huh.
reducing technical debt, aging workforce, and modernization of
Uh-huh.
platforms. And those are the three pillars that I'm thinking have been foundationally why I invested in OutSystems, but
Uh-huh.
logically speaking, are things that as a CIO, I want to get done, right? I want to get rid of technical debt. I need to keep employees engaged and retained. And eventually people are going to roll off. So how do you
Yeah.
plan for that?
Yeah. Yeah. And you mentioned 7 years today, and in that process, when was the moment you realized traditional development alone wouldn't keep pace, and things needed to change?
I think that's a good question. And I don't know that I had one particular aha moment around that.
Hmm.
Look, I've been fortunate in this role. I meet a lot of people. I get put in front of a lot of vendors with unique ideas. I work
Uh,
with venture capital companies who are always introducing me to someone new. My last call was with an entrepreneur who's tried to reinvent themselves 3 times and,
yeah.
still wants to get out in front of me. And I still take the conversations.
Hmm.
I think specifically on the development front, when I was approached by the concept of OutSystems and when I saw the first demo, look, object oriented programming has been around for a long time. I never really conceptually bought in myself, and I'm more of an abstract kind of guy. I guess
Yeah.
maybe that's just the old school person who I am.
Yeah.
But when I saw what it could do, and then I saw the ease of use of just, and now, admittedly, it's not as easy as drag and drop. So I'm not trying to fool anybody or say,
Yeah.
hey, go put in OutSystems and you're going to be able to
Yeah.
drag and drop your code, code
Yeah.
to millions of lines and it's not
Yeah.
that. And I think AI has even changed that narrative
Yes.
something further, and we'll get into
Yeah.
that. But at least at the time when I saw the platform, and I wasn't really looking for
Hmm.
this type of solution as much as somebody pitched something to me,
Hmm.
but conceptually, it checked all of those boxes, right? It's something new. It's in the cloud. It's not C sharp sharp. I'm hoping that somebody I'm hoping that because it's not these legacy codes, that
Yeah.
somebody who's not as senior or somebody who's not going to roll off might be a little bit more able to pick it up based on a more modern education of how things are being taught in EDU now versus how they were taught
Yeah.
back then. So kind of all of those things, as I started to see the pieces fit together in front of me, said, yeah, this looks kind of cool. We should at least try this.
Yeah, yeah. And you mentioned it was kind of, brought to your attention, at the time, did you evaluate any others? You mentioned obviously you were working with cloud before people were talking about cloud. The term low code is kind of added on to rapid
Yeah.
application development. So one, had you kind of heard of it? And two, kind of, did you then evaluate it against other platforms in that
I had
space?
heard of the concept.
Mm,
I wasn't necessarily looking for the solution. And so, like with any other solution that I see, and my staff will accuse me of chasing shiny objects, and rightfully so. I don't make the decision in a vacuum.
uh-huh,
So I bring it back in front of the people who potentially are going to be using the tool. Tell me what you think. Can this help us? Would this help us? I didn't really evaluate it against anybody else. Um, Sometimes I do that to a fault. I think that that would be a fair criticism of me, but I found a tool that I liked, a company that I felt comfortable I can work with. If I go back to my financials at a price point that met my budget,
uh-huh.
that it was worth the experiment to see what it could do.
Yeah, yeah,
Right. And so I'm not going to go as far as saying fail fast. I think that's a little too cliche.
yeah,
But I think it's okay to take some risk. I think you have to take some risk. I think you have to be flexible enough and comfortable enough in your own skin to say, if this doesn't work, it doesn't work, but that's why you sign short-term contracts.
Yeah, sure.
And if you miss, you miss. They're not going to all win.
Yeah,
There are
yeah,
so many tools that I don't think you can put yourself in a position that you're going to get everyone to win. But as I said, I think you have to be comfortable enough to say that if it's really a loss, that at some point you make a minor investment and you cut your loss if you really can't make
yeah.
it happen.
Yeah, yeah. And, obviously, like you've touched on, you didn't look at others, but, when you were evaluating and looking deep into the platform, were there any concerns around, security, governance, and, enterprise readiness?
Well, I think you're always concerned about those things, either as a CIO or a CISO,
Mm,
right? I did not have any concerns when I did this evaluation. I was comfortable with the technology. I was comfortable with the architecture. Um, like most organizations, we go through third party risk management. So if there was anything that was truly a concern before we were able to purchase it, it went through all of those processes around security and governance from a campus level, from a comfort level. In most of the new applications we start with, we try to stay away from data that's sensitive and confidential on the first foray into those development opportunities, just again to minimize those kinds of risks. So all of that was the initial approach with OutSystems anyway.
yeah. Did you have any concerns around, because obviously, OutSystems, it's slowly growing its footprint in the United States, but compared to Europe, it's not that well known. There are use cases that they have for other kind of higher education, um, who are using the platform. But was that a concern that it wasn't that mature in the US?
No, it wasn't for me again, but
Mm.
I'll answer that by saying I know I live on the edge a lot and
Yeah.
I'm willing to take this kind of risk. And I think a lot of it, again, I would tell you is fueled by the fact that I work in an environment that encourages that. So it's less about taking the risk on a company or a technology. And for me, I tie everything to the fact that when I do business with somebody, the relationship is equally, if not more important. Obviously, the technology has to work,
Yeah,
right?
of course.
But
Yeah.
I have to be
Yeah.
comfortable with whom I'm working,
Yeah.
how I'm working with them, and again, what that company is doing with me as a partner to ensure
Mhm.
my success. Right. And so I've renewed that OutSystems contract. And if none of that existed after year one, there
Yeah.
wouldn't have been a renewal. Right. So
Yeah.
again, it didn't matter so much that I didn't know about them. Again, they were
Mhm.
recommended through somebody who I trusted. So
Yeah.
peer network helps. Again, that's a relationship component of doing business here. And again, the technology itself has proven itself out and it's proven to be useful to us. So as long as those boxes are all continually checked, we'll be fine. Right.
Yeah.
And if at any
Yeah.
point any of those things cease to exist, then maybe not so much.
Yeah, sure. And you touched on that, obviously, like, to start with, you know, short contract to kind of see how it goes, at what point, did it stop being, just an experiment and trying it out, and it became kind of really core to your projects?
Really last summer, right? So admittedly,
Mm,
we tell a success story here and it is one. It took us a long time to figure out that right first use case to develop, but we were successful with one once we kind of all put our heads to it and we got some help from OutSystems to be able to do so. So I think admittedly, as much as I was a fan of the drag and the drop, I think the learning
yeah.
curve was probably a little bit more difficult than I anticipated and maybe even some
Mm,
of my developers
mm,
anticipated. So I think this is not out of the box. It's not no code. There is a
mm,
lift and you do need some development fundamentals to make this work. So, I want to be clear about that to your listeners. It was mostly clear to me. We'll go with
mm.
partly cloudy, right? Or
Yeah.
partly
Yeah.
sunny, depending upon which side of that
Yeah.
continuum you sit on, right?
Yeah.
So no, I'm not going to say that somebody tried to sell me something different. I don't think
Yeah.
that's the case. I said maybe I didn't understand it as well as I could have. But last summer really was that key because I took a third party AI tool and I ran legacy code through that AI tool and platform 3 new OutSystems applications, right? So again, this is while Agent Workbench and AI Builder were
Mhm.
in development.
Yeah.
But again, I was able to easily enough take legacy code, run it through third party, and re-platform it on OutSystems. And that for us was really the either the aha moment or the
Yeah.
critical mass. We are working on a new app now. Um, the issues we're running into are not again because of development per se, but more integrations with identity management to make sure that we can authenticate properly. So it's
Mhm.
kind of a shared problem on the way UCLA does business and how
Yeah.
OutSystems is doing their business. But again, they've been excellent partners to work through that with us. And because of the push to get agents in production by whether it was December 30th or January 31st, we developed 2 agents through Agent Workbench
Wow.
and we've launched them into production. So it's really been the last 6 months that I think we've increased the momentum and our ability to better use the technology we've purchased and appreciate the benefits of what the platform has to offer.
Yeah. And you touched on, the understanding of maybe not being fully kind of aware of what the platform was and the background needed for it. Now that you've built some solutions, what's some of the feedback that surprised you, now that these applications are live?
I think mostly that the people that are using it continue to be impressed by it the more that they use it, right? I think it's getting over that first speed bump.
Mhm.
And I think we talked about this on our prep call really
Yeah.
briefly, but
Yeah.
I mean, they're intentional about making sure that you take the developer training before you launch into
Yes.
the platform. You certainly didn't understate it. You didn't hide that.
Yeah.
I certainly understand that now. I don't know that we did a good enough job internally
Mhm.
about freeing up our people so that they can do it. And then again, doing that in a matter that's just in time is even more important. So don't do that,
Yeah.
and then don't send them in training, and then don't give them
Yeah.
something to work
Shit
on. Right.
around.
So
Yeah, exactly.
there's this mix of doing this in a way that's going to maximize your investment in the tool set that I think is very important for your listeners to understand. And I know you know this, but
Yeah.
again, take the training, dedicate the developers time to the training, and then make sure they have a project to work on when they come out of the training to maximize your success.
Yeah. Did you have any developers, when you're obviously presenting, OutSystems low code solution who weren't so keen? Obviously it depends on their backgrounds. There's this big conversation about traditional developers not wanting to work with low code platforms, right? And wanting to stick in their lane. Did you have any of that pushback?
Not really. My most senior developer is Team Microsoft.
Okay.
Everything all in, all Microsoft. And look, I appreciate that. I respect that. I have no issues with that. Is he going to be the one that I'm looking to change? Likely not. So he's not as much an opponent as much as I don't think he's diving in as much as the rest of them. But I think that's okay if we go back to where we started again. That's one of the use cases for which I'm looking to
Mm,
solve is eventually that person's going to retire and
yeah.
I'm not going to have the luxury of having that person on staff. So how do I plan for that? Right. So I think this is less about the opposition. I mean, we can make the opposition argument about people thinking AI
Yeah.
is going to replace their jobs.
Yes.
You're always going to have people who are not going to be along with the party lines. And so for me, is this the only tool with which I develop? No. Do I mandate development tools? No. Look, if you can code something faster in C#,
Mhm.
we're about, and we should be about outcomes,
Yeah.
right? And at a developer level, look, it's not a rush to code, but it's about how quickly can we get to that desired outcome. So I'm still on board with using whatever
Yeah.
solution is going to get us there the most effectively and efficiently for our business. But again, as we talked about as a CIO and at a macro
Yeah.
level planning a strategy, you can't have a team of one offs and you have to plan for
Yeah,
ultimately
sure.
what your department's going to look like. So I think this is less about the naysayers
Mhm.
and more so about why is this potentially the correct strategy for you and your business, given where you are and where you want to go.
Sure.
right? And
Sure.
the landscape admittedly is changing rapidly, right? I think
Yes.
even maybe in the time since we spoke for prepping,
Yeah.
what I'm spending a majority of my time on now is trying to get Claude licenses for my faculty.
Okay.
And why that's significant is because to a person, they want the advantages of Claude Code.
Yeah.
And we could probably take this into another podcast, but the
Yeah.
reality
Yeah. We could. Yeah.
that Claude Code is changing the way that we're going to be doing business. And I'm not seeing this push from my internal development staff. I'm
Mm.
seeing it from faculty. And
Wow.
it's changing so fast that if we're doing this conversation 2 months from now, it
Yeah.
could be something else. I don't know if Codex is
Definitely.
going to overhop it. I don't know if Gemini is going to come up with the next tool.
Yeah.
I don't know what the software vendors are going to do because they're all
Yeah.
getting killed in the market. And we don't know
Yeah.
if the AI is going to replace them all. So it changes so quickly that I think, again, back to my previous point,
Yeah.
you can't lock yourself in. You need to be
Definitely.
flexible and agile in your approach. And also, I have a no code AI tool in my stack,
Mhm.
right? And it's called Stack AI, right?
Yeah.
But the reality is, I don't think there's one way to develop anymore.
Mhm.
And so giving
Yeah.
yourself a suite of tools that gives you a chance to keep up with the demands of your business to achieve their outcomes is really the better play or the better strategy.
Yeah, definitely. I think your point of the outcomes point is definitely important, and having the right toolbox and knowing which tool to use at which time is definitely the best
Well,
way to achieving those outcomes.
and look, they made a Swiss Army knife for a reason,
Yeah.
and I think that's a good tool. And I don't think you can just have a hammer.
Yes,
I mean, you've
definitely.
heard that a million times. You can probably
Yes.
hit in a nail with a screwdriver, but
Yeah.
having one tool in that toolkit, I don't know is the right answer. I
Yeah.
think I look at it in a more holistic way to
Yeah.
say, do I have the luxury? Because some people don't have the luxury, and especially in higher ed, if I go back to finances again,
Mm.
we don't all have that same luxury. But given that I might have a little bit more prosperity than someone else, what is the right combinations of tools that I can put into that toolkit to get us where we want to be
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
quickly and financially and efficiently as possible?
Yeah. Yeah. And talking about low code specifically, it's known for obviously accelerating delivery. But universities tend to be more risk averse. So how do you ensure the architecture, performance, security, and data governance don't really suffer?
As of now, they haven't. I don't know that it's been a heavy lift to do that
Mhm.
insurance. Again, from us, the premise with OutSystems early on was that it ran just within their AWS. So
Yeah.
for me, I look at that as my own little slice of private cloud. And
Hmm.
again, I'm comfortable with that. But I'm also intentional on my side about not putting things into the OutSystems ecosystem with which I'm not comfortable.
Hmm.
Right. So again, look, I have a handful of apps, like it may be 7 total right now.
Yeah.
I'm not at the point where I've scaled to where I've had to really step back and say, at a macro level, am I really concerned about security? I'm comfortable with the architecture. I'm comfortable with the
Yeah.
governance, and at face value, I'm comfortable with the security. But I also haven't pushed the envelope on it yet.
Hmm. Hmm. I guess your CISO background as well. Obviously, you've got a better understanding of the platform when they're presenting you the security options of what
Yes.
they're trying to do in there. So it gives you a bit more comfort at a higher level.
Well, look, anybody that's selling into industry today doesn't even get their foot in the door if they can't pass security
Yeah.
101 testing, right? So,
Yes, definitely.
I mean, look, we go through third party risk management for a reason,
Mm,
and I understand that.
mm.
And in today's world, I'm not sure that any of us could sit here comfortably and say to you 100%, I am so convinced that I'm never going to run into any trouble here.
Yeah.
I'm not going to
Yeah.
even say the word, but you get
Yeah.
where I'm going here. So
I know. Yeah.
I don't know that we're ever 100% comfortable with anything we're presented. So I
Mm,
think you have to take calculated risk and hope for the best, even though hope is not a strategy,
yeah.
and then look to do whatever you can do as you develop to minimize that risk as much as possible.
Yeah. Yeah. And how do you think about reusability and long term maintainability when you're, trying to deliver faster than you were doing
Uh,
before?
Again, I think that's one of the selling points to me about OutSystems is
Mm,
reusability of code, right? If the wheel's already been invented, why reinvent the wheel, right? So similarly here, what parts have I already developed that I'm just going to be able to more rapidly take and use that on something else? Yeah. Admittedly, with what we've done so far, I've not achieved any of that efficiency, but I believe that to be one of the benefits of the platform I've purchased. And again, I'm going to use the word hopeful, and we can argue about hopeful later,
yeah,
but
yeah.
I'm hopeful that that is one of the benefits downstream that I will be able to achieve as I continue to work with OutSystems.
Yeah, yeah. And you touched on before, and that might be the answer to this question, but in the time you've been using the platform, and you spoke about the talent side and the level they need to know, what lessons, did you kind of learn the hard way that, other higher education or any customer evaluating could benefit from early?
Look, I think the most important one for us was that, and we've talked about this already, is the
Mm,
training.
yeah.
It looks great when you see it.
Mm,
You will eventually be able to use it the way it's being demonstrated to you. But to expect that on day one,
yeah.
is a bit of an unfair expectation. So I think they've made improvements in terms of the approachability, but this is not vibe coding.
Yes.
And I go through this in my head a lot, and I'll reflect back on Claude Code for a
Mm,
minute, right? You can walk up to Claude Code today and say, build me an app that does X. And
yeah.
you're going to have an app that does X, right? And I'm having faculty again say, I can do this and this is great. And I'm not technical and I'm not a programmer and
Yeah.
yet it does, right? And it worries me about the future of what I would consider to be core foundational development techniques,
Sure.
right? And I still think to do development work at an enterprise level, you need people that have those skills. Now, maybe we don't need hundreds of them as we've done in the past
Mm,
or thousands of them, depending upon the size of your organization. But I still think you need people who foundationally and fundamentally know how to code without the use of the vibe coding tools. And as it relates to OutSystems, again, I still think you need that platform. I still think it's a skill that I value as an employer and as I roll out applications to my
yeah.
enterprise. So, and I think there's some of that skill that's needed to be able to use OutSystems and to use
Yeah.
OutSystems as it's intended to be used.
Yeah. Yeah. And universities often have, decentralized IT and strong faculty autonomy. So how did you approach, the buy-in and alignment without creating any resistance or slowing down innovation?
The decentralized argument we're going to have to save maybe for a pint at some point.
Okay. Yeah, fine.
I
Sounds
think
good.
that's a little too politically charged for me to
Yeah.
get into today, but I'll say it this way. I think the autonomy that I have in the seat in which I sit, which is decentralized, allows a lot of that friction to go away. So as long as I have vision and I have budget, I'm enabled to make these decisions for my organization. So it's less about the pushback and more about our ability to adopt the tool. And that's really the hardest part. And so that again brings us back to okay, before you buy out systems or before you buy any tool, what are the business outcomes you're trying to achieve and why? And for me, I don't know that I had the ready made use case on day one. And
Mhm.
one of the ones that I still want to tackle that I haven't gotten back to yet is onboarding.
Yeah.
And part of the reason why, and it's a great use case for OutSystems, is because the business process that we have around onboarding is way too complex to have taken that on as a first use case. Right. And that's not an OutSystems problem. That's an us problem because
Yeah.
again, in university, we've got processes that have been in place for years. We are probably among the slowest people to change. And we could argue about
Mm,
government and other industry. And I'm sure
yeah,
people will tell you about change management at their
yeah,
organizations. But admittedly, if I'm following your questioning and the bouncing ball,
mm,
we're slow to change in general. We
yeah,
have processes that have been that way forever. In addition to being slow to change, it's less about the change and people being willing to change, right? And so when you add all of that into the mix, again, it's understanding that the technology that you're buying here can help to facilitate that change more quickly when everything lines up.
yeah, yeah. It's interesting. And you spoke about AI, and obviously OutSystems has its features, but from your perspective, before automation or agents can take action, what foundation does a university really need to be truly AI ready?
Ooh, that's a great question. I don't know that we were AI ready when we started.
Yeah,
Um, I still don't know how AI ready we are. And, fundamentally, we have what one of our faculty members is calling a digital divide. And he was concerned about it from the outset because we have people who just don't want to approach AI. Or you told me to use Copilot. I can use this.
yeah,
I thought I was about, so again, the
yeah,
messaging has to be crystal clear. I'm finding it's not, right? I think certainly before you're AI ready, you have to be data ready. Most of us are not data ready. But I also think that the risk of inaction around AI is worse than the risk of action around AI, right? So I think if you look at the value proposition that we offer and why students come to our schools is we're preparing them, especially in my case, to be
mm,
leaders in companies where they're going to be expected to use AI and make decisions using AI. So if we're not AI ready and we're not providing them with an experience to do that, then they're going to make another choice. They're
yeah,
going to find a school that does that.
yeah,
So I think,
yeah,
at least as far as my industry goes, whether we're AI ready or not, we have to be, and we should be prepared for that. And again, I keep coming back to Claude Code because
mm,
I've been almost production live with 2 agents for almost 2 years now this April,
yeah. Wow.
right? And in all the time I've had AI available, I've had less than 10 faculty members outwardly express interest in participating in what we were sort of doing at an enterprise level. Now, I'm sure, and it's come to light that they were definitely using AI, and not all of them have figured out exactly how to use AI in the curriculum, or if they were doing it,
Yeah.
it may not have been visible to me, and that's okay. But I had 60 people raise their hand real quick and say, I need Claude Max tomorrow, right?
Wow.
So they are entirely 100% engaged on this.
Yeah.
We know students have been using it from the get go, right? So when you tie all of that together, and this gets back to your questions around governance and guardrails and
Yeah.
readiness, being able to have a position and a posture that says, this is what we're doing as a school is imperative, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
that's kind of the definition around AI readiness at this point.
Yeah. Yeah.
Understand that it's all around you, that people are likely using it.
Mm,
Figure out how it makes sense for you and your seat, if you're in IT, to support that. And whether you as the enterprise are ready to do that as IT, whether you've accepted the fact that it's going to be shadow IT, do you understand the risk of what type of data may be going out because people are using it from their personal accounts, or what they're putting in and how the models are being trained? I mean, all of that discussion around it, I think forces you at a minimum to understand what an AI readiness posture should look like and then go from there.
yeah. Yeah. And where do you see AI or more agent like workflows realistically adding value in higher education, and where do you see human judgment remains firmly in place still?
Look, I'm a firm believer that the human is never going to entirely leave the loop.
Mm,
And at least where we are in March of 2026, I believe that. We'll have to check
yeah.
back in 3 months and see
Yeah.
how this aged, or if it aged well or not at
Yeah.
all.
Yeah.
2025 was supposed to be the year of agentic AI. I'm not sure how many people really achieved that. I
Yeah.
think 2026 has more likelihood to be the year of it, but we've not necessarily figured out what agentic AI really means for our business and where we have use cases to do so. I've not turned anything exclusively over to AI agents. Um,
Uh-huh.
but what did I see? I saw something the other day that was like, just this, it's going to schedule this email for you. It's going to read your calendar. It's going to plan out your
Uh-huh.
week. I mean, there are things that logically AI can do today and will be
Yeah.
able to do tomorrow that makes sense to fully turn over to the AI, right? I can't tell you other than maybe what I just cited there, where I
Uh-huh.
would be comfortable doing that.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean I'm not exploring what I'm an art of the possible guy.
Uh-huh.
I just don't know what that means yet for my processes. Again, I'm looking at things that I would consider to be lower risk, less from a data perspective, not
Yeah.
sensitive or confidential, and really seeing how it works in real life for us before being better able to answer your question. But that's
Uh-huh.
kind of where my head sits on that right now.
Yeah, yeah, and with the OutSystems platform, obviously, there's this big agentic push. There's Agent Workbench. They're investing a lot in that. Mentors there as well. I'm interested to know. What's your views on? Obviously, last year that was what they've pushed out with Agent Workbench. Some people had early access, some didn't. Now it's available to everyone, encouraging everyone to build with agents using Agent Workbench. What do you think of Agent Workbench, and what's your views on that?
I like what I've seen so far, but admittedly, to not do it again, I think goes back to my risk of inaction statement,
Yeah,
right? I think the bigger players, and I was just on it, like I said, I was on a call with an
yeah,
entrepreneur a little while ago, right? And he's developing a solution that's really helping us figure out where all of our things are going because people are developing with AI, whether it's native
uh,
to whether it's ServiceNow, Salesforce, Copilot Studio, Claude Code. We have things from AI that are going everywhere because that's what this market yields. So I think OutSystems needed a solution there. I like what I've seen from their solution, but for me, again, that's table stakes today,
yeah,
right? As it relates to agent, I'd love to I mentioned that onboarding process.
uh,
That whether you want to go back and call it RPA, whether you want to call it workflow automation, I think that's where agents make a lot of sense. I think we have so many manual processes and handoffs within our businesses
uh,
that's where AI does well, and that's where AI agents will continue to do well, and that's to where I would like to see us scale next.
yeah, yeah. And if other higher ed CIOs are listening in, and they want to start with a low code platform like OutSystems, where would you recommend they begin? Even on the use case side of things, and also, you've touched on it, but from what you know now versus what you knew in the beginning, how to succeed.
Yeah, I think start small. So this is
Uh-huh.
a clearly don't bite off more than you can chew. Again, let's go back to the training.
Yeah.
But I think you want to find a use case that A gives you comfort in figuring out how to develop using the tool, right? So again, don't pick something so big. So pick something that's relatively narrow in scope and pick a use case that's going to deliver some business value, but is certainly not your most critical business process, right? So I
Yeah.
think starting with something, I don't want to call it low risk or low investment because that's not fair. But I mean, don't set your goals on driving the Lamborghini day one.
Yeah.
Start with a Lexus or
Yeah.
something like that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Start start with something where you're going to be able to achieve success relatively quickly and get those quick wins in under your belt. And I think for each of us, that use case is going to be different. I mean,
Uh,
I'm trying to figure out in my head where I want to scale our agentic AI next.
yeah.
And I'm not sure that I have the use cases. And even on the initial work we did, the use case is always the hardest part.
Mhm.
There are a ton of them to think about in higher ed, and the Gartners and Infotechs of the world will be more than happy to discuss with you, as they've
Yeah.
discussed with me, sort of what if you go back to your chemistry and your periodic chart of elements,
Yeah.
they will have those things for you to help ideate.
Mm.
I don't know that I can pick one that I would say makes sense or doesn't make sense. Again, what I like about the agent workbench is that you can take any requirements document
Yeah.
and feed it in, and it will get you on your way. So maybe this sort of refactoring of something that you've developed fairly recently that you have good documentation on is a good candidate to either run side by side or to see how quickly you could replace it with OutSystems. Because again, what the AI is good at is looking at information you already have and making recommendations on how to do something else with it or how to, again, degenerate it. We'll just go into the generative part of it, right? So again, if you've got a good requirements document, it will be able to generate a skeleton, a straw man, as you were, of what that will look like in OutSystems. And if you've been trained, you should be able to pick that up and run and figure that out pretty quickly. So
Yeah.
that's likely where I would start with what I
Yeah.
know now and
Mm.
what I might have hoped for then.
Yeah, yeah. And, finally, with like you said, things that like, we could have a whole different conversation in a few months' time and things are evolving. What are you kind of personally, kind of, excited about or looking forward to, and seeing how things evolve in this agentic AI space?
It's really an arms race, to be honest. And look, today's flavor of the month is Claude Code. I don't know
Yeah,
what next month's flavor is going to
yeah,
be. I saw something from the CIO of Workato the other day posted on LinkedIn about how, as a CIO, we should be out there building. And
mhm,
I'm actually trying to free up my space, as
yeah,
it were, so that I can get back in.
mm.
I geeked out a couple weeks ago and I installed Claude Code. 'Cause I'm like, what is all this Claude Code about? Everybody's asking for it. I should
Yeah, of course.
understand what it is.
Yeah,
And I asked it to do something and generate a file, and I printed it out. And it's like 10 o'clock at night. And
yeah,
I ran upstairs to my wife with the piece of paper. She's like, "Get the hell out of here! Get out of here!
yeah,
Don't do that." But again, that
yeah,
process of as the person in this seat, right?
mhm,
Understanding yourself and being able to build with it, I think is so important in helping you make those next decisions for your organization. Again, I was out with a fellow CIO last week, and he's, oh,
mm,
I came from software developer, and I've already created these 3 apps, and this is great. And he could sit
wow,
there for hours, and he did
yeah,
for 2 hours, just
yeah,
so excited about everything he built with AI
yeah,
and with Claude
yeah,
Code because it can do that. So I think it's incumbent upon us as IT leaders to understand what this means
yeah,
and how to be able to do this ourselves so that we can better assess what that impact is and what that means for our organizations or for the people who are doing this for a living day to day and
sure.
how to better make those decisions.
Yeah, yeah, amazing. Well, I appreciate you speaking to me, Howard. It was
You're
great
welcome.
to hear your journey with, OutSystems, even just, how you're kind of looking at AI and, the things you've learned. And, I think it'd definitely be great to speak again in the future and see how things have evolved for you and, what tools you're using and, as things change. So I'd definitely love to get you on
I,
again.
I- I'll leave your readers with this, and it's probably still
Yes.
a US thing, right?
Yeah.
But the concept of there was a TV show in the late 60s, or it was a cartoon called The Jetsons, right? I don't know
Yep.
if you're familiar with The
I've
Jetsons,
heard of it.
but,
Yes, I've
but
heard
they
of it.
had
Yeah.
flying saucers, and the Jetsons
Yes.
actually had the first Zoom call. And the Jetsons had all of this modern technology, but there was a robot on the show called Rosie the Robot. And somebody made the comment the other day that with all of that technology, Rosie the Robot was like old dated technology at the time with everything else
Yeah.
modern they had, that they had this old beat up robot. And
Yeah.
it's just fascinating to even go back and look at that as a cartoon and
Yeah.
60 years ago, just to see how they predicted the future, but
Yeah.
even what our lens on the past is on this and how quick it's changing. So
Yeah.
this conversation could be dated tomorrow. I don't know. I hope not,
Yeah.
but
Yeah, let's hope not. Yeah.
right, but things are
Yeah.
changing so rapidly, and as technologists in this time, AI has been the most transformational thing that
Yeah.
I've seen in my
Yeah.
IT career, and it's not going anywhere anytime soon. So,
Yeah.
but
It's
that's
definitely the
actually
most
invigorating at the
disruptive.
stage of life and career. It really
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's, like, when I've attended a few Gartner conferences, and obviously even every conference at the moment is surrounded around AI, right? So if it's kind of, if that's not what you're talking about, no
Right,
one's really kind of attending or following. So it's definitely a very disruptive time that's got everyone's attention, and it's exciting. It's exciting to see. Obviously, like you touched on, that yeah, there's some conversations around will it replace me or will it not? But I think we're still a bit away from that stage. But people will have to kind of learn and evolve and keep up with the times.
for sure.
Well, I appreciate it, Howard, and yeah, definitely, I think we should speak again.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for us.